In this section, Paul picks up the first and the major problem in the church of Corinth. That's the problem of divisions in the church. Let's first describe the problem. As it was reported to Paul by Chloe's household, there were tensions and wrangling and factions among them. Greek scholar W.E. Wine lists 4 words that may lead to breakup. Number 1, stasis, which means a strong disagreement. Dichostasia, which means a standing apart. Schisma, a severe rent, a tear, dissensions. 4. Hierasis, a mature and established separation. We must note here that the third word is used by Paul in Corinthians, thus suggesting the Corinthian church was in the danger of complete breakup. Now we don't know what exactly caused this division at Corinth. The church was, however, divided into 4 groups. Let me just share something about these 4 groups. Number 1, the first group was the Apollos party. According to Acts chapter 18, Apollos, he came from a big city, Alexandria in Egypt. Apollos was a learned man, came to Corinth with all his intellectual ability, fine speaking, and knowledge of Old Testament scriptures, and thus began to attract a personal following. Though he did not stay long at Corinth, people were attracted to him. So the first group were this Apollos party. The Paul party. The members of the Paul party saw Paul as their spiritual father. He had brought them to faith. They were strongly attached to Paul and were grateful for Paul's labor on their behalf. Number 3, the Peter party. This party represented Jewish Christianity, and they chose Peter as their leader and as the leader of their party. Number 4, the Christ party. This was a general group who thought, why do we need leaders anyway? We belong to Christ. This group is very difficult to evaluate. Let me highlight some important lessons from this passage. Number 1, the church of Corinth was deeply divided with people following different individual leaders. The existence of these 4 parties does not mean that these leaders, namely Paul or Apollos, were in competition with one another. It were the people who were using their names to create parties. Not even one party was right. You may say, maybe the party of Christ was right. No, not even Christ's party was right. Because of their party mentality, not one of them is good. And we see that all groups were put down by Paul. What we have in verse 13 is a series of questions with many question marks. Paul says, is Christ, the Messiah, divided into parts? Was Paul crucified on behalf of you? Or were you baptized in the name of Paul? So these are not just statements but questions to think and ponder over. Let me share an important lesson. Don't compare God's spokesperson with their personality and style of the presentation of the truth. What is more important is the content of their message and their lifestyle. Second, differences grow around personalities and then become matters of doctrinal dispute. They claimed and said, so and so baptized me, thinking that baptized by so and so person made them holy. In verse 14, Paul says, I thank God that I did not baptize any one of you except Crispus and Gaius. In verse 15, Paul says, for no one can say they were baptized in my name. Friends, is Paul trying to belittle baptism? No. The importance of baptism is not in who gave it. The key while taking baptism is whether Jesus is there in our heart or not. Paul is stressing a point here that they forgot the fact that baptism is just an outward sign of an inward change. It does not matter who gave the baptism, but what is important is the heart. So, when a Christian or a group of Christians becomes totally absorbed with one aspect of the truth, or to the extent of neglecting, exclusion, or denial of the whole truth, then there is always a danger point that is reached, and that selectivity will become heresy. Now, what is Paul's response to the problem of division? Before describing the problem, Paul actually makes a strong appeal for unity in verse number 10. He begins the problem by making a strong appeal for this unity. In verse 10, Paul says, I urge you, brethren, I entreat you, brethren, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, be in perfect harmony, in full agreement in whatever you say. There should be no dissensions or factions or divisions among you. In verse 10 is the key verse in this whole section. It summarizes the approach of Paul to the problem of division. This also can be seen as a response of Paul, but also as a conclusion to the whole matter of divisions.